The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline when Marcus Green stepped onto the porch of his new ranch, coffee mug steaming in his hand. The smell of hay, earth, and morning dew filled his lungs. For months he had been dreaming of this moment, the peace of owning land that was finally his. A man who had spent his life saving penny by penny from long shifts in construction and odd jobs. Marcus felt an overwhelming satisfaction in hearing nothing but birds and the distant whinny of horses. But peace never lasts long when control-hungry people live nearby. Marcus bent down to pick up the local newspaper lying on the steps, but another envelope caught his attention. It was folded crisply, tucked beneath the paper as if deliberately hidden. His name was typed in bold letters across the front. For a moment he thought it might be a welcome letter from one of the neighbors. After all, the community was small, and most folks had noticed when he and his wife Alana moved in just outside of Red Rock Valley, Arizona. Instead, when Marcus opened the envelope, the words sliced through him like a blade. "You have 72 hours to vacate or sell your property. Failure to comply will result in penalties and enforcement." At the bottom, the letter bore the official seal of the Red Rock Homeowners Association, signed by none other than Claudia Hensley, the HOA president. Marcus stared at the page, his jaw tightening. He read it again and again as though repetition might make the words shift into something less absurd. Sell his ranch in 3 days? Vacate land he had legally purchased, with every county zoning approval, every deed checked and stamped. The reason was spelled out in shallow justification. His fencing did not match the community standards. His livestock, 3 horses and a small group of cattle, were inappropriate for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Marcus clenched the letter so tightly that the edges bit into his fingers. This wasn't just some petty complaint, it was a threat. Inside the modest ranch house, Alana was finishing breakfast. The kettle whistled, eggs sizzled on the pan, and the smell of butter filled the room. Marcus entered silently, the letter folded in his hand. His wife noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, sliding the kettle off the stove. He placed the letter on the table. "Read it." Her eyes moved quickly across the page. As her lips tightened, her hand shook slightly. 72 hours? Who does this Claudia think she is? The president of this HOA, Marcus muttered bitterly. "But she doesn't own me." Alana sat down across from him. "So what are you going to do?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the wide stretch of pasture, at the fence he had mended with his own calloused hands, at the barn that carried the scent of honest work. The thought of losing it all, not to debt, not to the law, but to one arrogant neighbor with a title, filled him with heat that burned in his chest. Finally, he looked back at Alana. "I'm not going anywhere." That evening, Marcus decided to face the storm head-on. Claudia Hensley's house was easy to find. It was the largest property in the neighborhood, sitting on a hill with a perfectly manicured lawn, hedges trimmed into unnatural symmetry, and flower pots arranged like showroom props. The place looked less like a home and more like a magazine cover. Marcus knocked firmly. When the door swung open, Claudia herself appeared. In her late 50s, she had sharp eyes, a rigid posture, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Green," she said coolly, as though she had been expecting him. "You want to explain this?" Marcus held up the letter. Claudia's smile faltered for half a heartbeat, then returned with icy composure. "It's quite clear, isn't it? Your property does not comply with the community's vision. You'll need to make other arrangements." "My land is zoned for ranching," Marcus replied evenly. "The county approved it. Every paper is in order." Claudia tilted her head. "Sometimes what's legal isn't what's best for everyone." That sentence landed like a stone in Marcus's gut. He understood immediately this wasn't about fences or livestock. This was about control. "I'm not selling," Marcus said firmly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you'll face consequences. The board stands with me." Marcus leaned closer, locking eyes with her. "We'll see about that." He turned, letter still crumpled in his fist, boots crunching against gravel as he headed back to his truck. This wasn't over. That night, Marcus lay awake, the encounter playing in his mind on repeat. Claudia's smug tone, her certainty that he would bow. He could feel Alana shift beside him, her hand finding his in the dark. "You can't let her win," she whispered. "I won't," he promised. The ranch wasn't just dirt and wood. It was his dream, his years of sweat turned tangible. And if Claudia thought she could intimidate him into selling, she had underestimated him deeply. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He wasn't going to sit around waiting for penalties to arrive in the mail. He was going straight to the source. Alana watched him pull on his boots. "Where are you going?" "To the HOA meeting," he said flatly. "Be careful, she won't back down. Neither will I." The community center sat ironically close to Marcus's property line. In fact, he noticed for the first time that part of the parking lot seemed to spill onto land that technically belonged to his ranch. Most residents probably didn't even know. When Marcus entered, the room went quiet. Conversation stopped. Claudia sat at the head of the table, 3 board members at her side. Her lips stretched into a thin smile. "Mr. Green," she said, "we weren't expecting you." "I got your letter," Marcus said, pulling out a chair directly across from her. So here I am, one of the board members, a balding man with glasses, cleared his throat. We need to maintain order, sir. This isn't the time for individual grievances. It's exactly the time, Marcus cut him off. You gave me 72 hours to sell my property. I want to know who gave you the right to demand that. Claudia folded her hands neatly. The board and I are responsible for upholding the community's values. Your fencing and livestock, while perhaps acceptable elsewhere, don't align with our standards. It creates an image problem. An image problem? Marcus repeated. You mean my ranch doesn't look like your magazine lawns and plastic flower beds? That's not an image problem. That's you trying to erase anything that doesn't fit your control. The room fell into a hush. Some neighbors exchanged glances, but nobody spoke. Claudia's smile tightened. You can interpret it however you like, but the board has the authority to fine you daily until you comply. Marcus leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. Fine me? For what? Owning livestock on agriculturally zoned land? Repairing my own fences? You're not above the law, Claudia. Her jaw stiffened. This isn't about law. It's about harmony. If you truly cared about this community, you'd make adjustments. Marcus laughed bitterly. Harmony? I've been here 3 weeks. Not once have you asked about my family, my work, or my plans. The only harmony you care about is the kind you can control. For the first time, Claudia's composure cracked. Her cheeks flushed as she tapped the gavel sharply. This discussion is over. Marcus stood slowly. No, it's just beginning. As he left the room, he caught glimpses of neighbors, 2 women whispering, a man nodding quietly. They weren't bold enough to speak up, but their eyes told the story. They'd seen this before. Back at the ranch, Alana was waiting on the porch. How bad was it? She asked. She tried to shut me down in front of everyone, Marcus said, sinking into a chair, but I saw it in their faces. People are tired of her. They just don't know how to fight back. So what's your move? Marcus looked out over his land. I'm going to find out exactly how much power she really has. And then I'll make sure she never uses it against us again. But what Marcus didn't realize yet was that Claudia's grip on the neighborhood ran deep, and he wasn't the first person she'd tried to bully. Others had already felt her iron hand, and they were waiting for someone brave enough to push back. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because the battles worth telling are the ones that show us what real strength looks like. Marcus woke before dawn the next morning. The chores were familiar, feeding the horses, cleaning the stalls, refilling troughs, but his mind was elsewhere. Every clang of the bucket, every scrape of hay reminded him of Claudia's smug face and her words echoing like a warning. Sometimes what's legal isn't what's best for everyone. It was more than arrogance. It was a declaration that in Red Rock Valley, Claudia Hensley's word meant more than the law. By noon, Marcus had decided he wouldn't wait for her next move. He would get ahead of her. Later that afternoon, Marcus drove into town for supplies at the Clifton Feed and Grain. The smell of oats and fertilizer hung in the air as he loaded bags onto a cart. A man stocking shelves paused, eyeing him curiously. You're the new rancher out by Mesa Ridge, right? The man asked. That's me, Marcus replied, adjusting his cap. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. Claudia already after you. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. How do you know? The man chuckled bitterly. She's got a pattern. New folks move in, especially if they don't fit her picture-perfect mold, and suddenly they're breaking rules she invented last week. You're not the first. Marcus froze. You mean she's pulled this on others? Plenty, the man said, his voice hushed. Some just sell and leave. Others fight for a while, but she wears them down. Always wins in the end. Or at least she used to. Marcus carried that conversation with him all the way home. Maybe Claudia wasn't as untouchable as she believed. Maybe she'd left scars on others, and scars had a way of leaving trails. That evening, Marcus repaired a section of fencing near the community center. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see an older woman with silver hair pinned in a bun. She moved with the ease of someone who'd worked the land her whole life. You're Marcus Green, right? She asked. I am, he replied cautiously. I'm Francis Doyle. Been here 30 years, saw what happened at the meeting. She glanced around nervously, as though afraid someone might overhear. You stood your ground, that takes guts. Marcus shrugged. Doesn't feel like it changed anything. Oh, it did, Francis said softly. You have no idea how many of us have been waiting for someone to finally stand up to her. Claudia's been running this HOA like her personal kingdom. Last year, she fined a family $500 for having too many cars in their driveway, even though the bylaws don't say a word about it. Marcus frowned. And nobody fought back? People tried. But she threatens them with endless fines, legal action, even foreclosure. Most just give up. Francis' eyes softened. You're different, I can tell. And she knows it too. As Francis walked away, Marcus felt something stir in him. Claudia wasn't just his problem, she was a problem for everyone. 2 days later, while Marcus was moving hay bales into the barn, another neighbor stopped by. A man in his mid-30s with tired eyes and a slouched posture introduced himself. Owen Castillo, he said, extending a hand. I live 2 streets over, heard you've had a run-in with Claudia. You could say that, Marcus replied, shaking his hand. Owen glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. She pulled the same stunt on me 2 years back, claimed my shed was too tall, threatened to fine me every day until I tore it down. I couldn't afford the fight, ended up caving, lost thousands. Marcus's jaw tightened. She's been getting away with this for years. Owen nodded. She knows most people don't have the stomach for legal battles. She's counting on you folding like the rest of us. But Marcus wasn't going to fold. He had something others didn't, a stubborn streak and a refusal to let go of the dream he'd fought so hard to earn. That night, Marcus and Alana spread papers across the kitchen table. Deeds, zoning approvals, every document tied to the ranch. She's been running unchecked, Alana said, tapping one of the maps. But you've already spotted inconsistencies. If she's this reckless, there's a trail somewhere. Marcus thought about the community center, the way the parking lot seemed to spill across his property line. He remembered the realtor pointing out that the previous owner had leased part of the land years ago. At the time, Marcus hadn't thought much of it. But now, I need to check county records, he said slowly. There's something she doesn't want me to see. The next day, he drove to the county clerk's office in Mesa. Hours passed as he pored over maps and lease agreements, the smell of old paper thick in the air. When he finally leaned back in his chair, his pulse quickened. There it was, in black and white, proof that the HOA had been leasing part of his land, the very ground where the community center stood. The agreement had expired when the property changed hands, which meant they were trespassing, which meant Claudia had been running meetings, collecting dues, and using his land illegally. Marcus made copies, tucking them carefully into a folder. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something he hadn't in days. Control. When Marcus arrived home, Alana met him at the door. Well, Marcus handed her the folder. She thinks she's holding all the cards. She's wrong. They spread the documents across the table, highlighting sections with a pen. The HOA's lease expired when you bought the ranch, Alana said, her voice firm. They never renegotiated. They're using your land without permission. Marcus nodded. And charging residents for access, which means they've been profiting off something they don't even own. Alana's eyes burned with quiet fire. So what's the plan? Marcus leaned back, his mind racing. First, I gather every certified copy I can get my hands on. Then I bring this straight to the board, and when I do, the whole neighborhood will see who's really been breaking the rules. The following morning, Marcus returned to the county recorder's office. He requested certified copies of deeds, zoning maps, and lease agreements until the clerk raised an eyebrow at the growing stack. Looks like you're about to stir something up, she said. You have no idea, Marcus replied with a grim smile. That night, he rehearsed what he would say. He pictured Claudia's smug expression, her voice dripping with authority. This time, he wouldn't walk into the room with just words. He would walk in with proof. You're not just fighting for us, Alana said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're fighting for everyone she's bullied. Marcus nodded. And I plan on winning. The next Thursday, the HOA scheduled its monthly meeting. Marcus arrived early, binder tucked under his arm. Neighbors filled the room, murmuring in hushed tones. Some nodded politely at him, others whispered behind cupped hands. At the front, Claudia sat tall, her fixed smile in place. Mr. Green, she said, her tone falsely sweet, I didn't see your name on the agenda. You will now, Marcus replied, pulling out a chair. He placed the binder on the table with a thud that cut through the murmurs. We're here to discuss landscaping guidelines, Claudia said sharply. Not personal disputes. Marcus opened the binder and slid out the certified documents. This isn't personal, it's about the HOA leasing land it doesn't own. The room went silent. The community center, Marcus continued, holding up the papers. And part of this parking lot sit on my property. The lease expired when I bought the ranch. You've been trespassing and collecting money from residents without legal right. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Francis Doyle let out a low whistle. Claudia's hands tightened around her pen. That arrangement has been in place for years. Mr. Green is misinterpreting the documents. Marcus slapped down another sheet, the county seal shining under fluorescent lights. There's no misinterpretation. Here's the deed, here's the lease. Terminated at the sale. You're not entitled to this land. A man in the back row stood up. So all those fines and dues increases, where's the money going, Claudia? Murmurs erupted. People craned their necks to hear. Claudia's cheeks flushed as she raised her voice. This is not the place for wild accusations. It's the perfect place, Marcus shot back. You threatened me with penalties. You told me to sell my land in 72 hours. But the truth is, you're the one breaking rules. For the first time, Claudia's composure cracked. The board exchanged uneasy glances. One finally spoke. If what he's saying is accurate, the board has been operating under false assumptions. That's nonsense, Claudia snapped. He's twisting this to make himself look like a victim. Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady. Spin it however you like. From this moment on, if the HOA wants to keep using that land, they'll deal with me, directly, and the terms won't be what you're used to. The room fell into tense silence. Claudia slammed the gavel. This meeting is adjourned. But people didn't rise immediately. Some lingered, whispering to each other. Francis caught Marcus's eye and gave him a small approving nod. Owen stood by the door, waiting. When Marcus walked past, Owen whispered, "You hit her where it hurts. She's not done, but now she knows you're not bluffing." That night, Marcus spread the papers across the kitchen table again. Alana sat across from him, pride shining in her eyes. "You handled yourself better than most men would," she said softly. Marcus shook his head. "This was just the first shot. She'll come back harder." Alana leaned forward. "Then you'd better be ready to finish what you started." Marcus stared down at the binder. Claudia wasn't just an obstacle anymore. She was an enemy. And enemies backed into corners didn't retreat quietly. The days following the explosive HOA meeting were thick with tension. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes, conversations hushed when Marcus walked by. Some gave him polite nods of respect. Others avoided his gaze entirely, fearful of being seen as allies. For Marcus it felt like standing on a battlefield before the next barrage. Claudia had been wounded, but she wasn't retreating, she was regrouping. And Marcus knew from the fire in her eyes that night she wouldn't go down quietly. Word spread quickly. Flyers appeared on bulletin boards claiming Marcus wanted to bleed the community dry. Rumors flew that he was planning to bulldoze the community center and replace it with a private horse arena. At the grocery store, Marcus overheard two women muttering, "He's only been here a month, and he's already tearing this place apart. I heard he's demanding triple the rent." "Who does that?" Marcus clenched his jaw but said nothing. Claudia's strategy was clear: paint him as the villain, the greedy outsider. Back at the ranch, Alana noticed his frustration. "She's poisoning the well," she said, arms folded as she watched neighbors drive by slower than usual, eyes peering through car windows. "Yeah," Marcus muttered, "but the only cure is truth." That afternoon, Owen showed up at the ranch with a folder under his arm. "You're gonna want to see this," he said, setting it on the table. Inside were years of HOA newsletters and financial statements. The numbers climbed steadily, dues increases year after year, but the expenditures didn't line up. No clear accounting for the extra money. "She's been padding the budget," Owen explained, "always blaming rising costs." Nobody questioned it, but if you lay this next to your lease documents, the story starts to show itself. Marcus flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing. "She's been using my land illegally and pocketing money from residents, and she's been doing it for years." Francis stopped by later that evening, balancing a plate of pie as though sugar might soften the weight of her words. "People are torn," she said. "Half think you're saving the community, the other half think you're tearing it apart. But once they realize she's been lying about money too," she paused. "Well, that'll tip the scales." Alana leaned forward, her tone sharp. "So the question is, when do we make the move?" Marcus looked down at the papers. Now. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, pen in hand, heart pounding. If Claudia had been feeding off power for years, the only way to end her reign was to starve her of it. He outlined a new lease. The terms were precise, airtight, rent set at triple the previous rate, strict deadlines, penalties for late payments, immediate eviction of HOA property if terms weren't met. It wasn't cruelty. It was fairness, the kind of fairness Claudia had denied countless neighbors. When he finished, he slid the papers into a thick envelope. Alana watched quietly, pride and nerves warring in her eyes. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "I am," Marcus replied. "She tried to push me off my land. Now she can pay to stay on mine." The next morning, Marcus drove into town. The envelope rested on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. With each mile, his determination solidified. He pulled up to the HOA office, ironically located inside the very community center, sitting illegally on his land. Without hesitation, he slipped the envelope into their mailbox. By the time he returned to the ranch, the weight that had been pressing against his chest for weeks finally eased. The decision was made. The phone rang 2 days later. Marcus was in the barn when he answered. Claudia's voice burst through the line, sharp and furious. "This document you left us, it's absurd, outrageous. You can't just invent numbers and call it rent." Marcus leaned against the fence, squinting at the horizon. "It's not invented, it's market rate. If the HOA wants to keep using my land, that's the cost." "You're extorting the community," she snapped. "No," Marcus said evenly. "I'm charging fair rent for land you've been using illegally for years. You've had it cheap, now you'll pay what it's worth, or move your center somewhere else." There was a long pause, then a hiss of frustration. "You'll regret this." The line went dead. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, shaking his head. That's what bullies always say. Word of the lease spread like wildfire. Neighbors called, texted, even stopped by the ranch. Some were supportive. Others were panicked. Francis showed up first, carrying cornbread. "She's furious," she said, setting the plate on the counter. "Called an emergency meeting tomorrow night. She's going to paint you as the villain." Marcus crossed his arms. "Let her. The documents speak for themselves. Don't underestimate her," Francis warned. "She's good at twisting things. People are afraid of her." The next evening, the community center buzzed with tension. Chairs filled quickly, some residents standing along the walls. The air felt electric. Claudia banged her gavel sharply. We are here to address Mr. Green's outrageous attempt to gouge this community. He has presented a so-called lease demanding payments that would cripple our budget." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus rose slowly, binder in hand. His voice was calm but firm. "I didn't create this situation. The lease ended when I bought the ranch. You've been using my land illegally. Every dollar you've collected since then has been under false pretenses. I'm not gouging you. I'm asking you to pay fairly or leave." A man in the back stood up. "Is that true, Claudia? Did the lease end?" Claudia's face flushed. "The details are complicated." "No, they're not," Owen interrupted, stepping forward. "He showed me the papers. It's all there, black and white." The room erupted in chatter. Some residents demanded answers, others looked betrayed. Claudia slammed her gavel. "This is a hostile takeover of our community resources." "No," Marcus replied steadily. "This is me enforcing the law, something you claim to care about when you threaten me. You don't get to pick and choose when rules apply." Francis stood from the aisle. "He's right. We've all watched you twist rules against us for years. This time you can't." Claudia's composure wavered. Her voice cracked as she raised it. "If we pay this rent, dues will skyrocket, families will suffer, and whose fault is that?" Marcus didn't flinch. The man who bought land fair and square, or the leader who kept everyone in the dark while overstepping her authority? Silence fell. Faces turned, some nodding grimly. The tide was shifting. That night, as Marcus drove home, Alana reached across the truck cab and squeezed his hand. "You turned the tables," she said softly. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "It's not over. She won't go down without a fight." The following morning, something was different. At the gas station, a man gave him a nod of respect. At the grocery store, a young mother whispered to her friend, "That's the rancher who stood up to Claudia." It wasn't fame, but it was recognition. Marcus wasn't just a lone rancher fighting for his land anymore. He was a symbol, a reminder that Claudia's power wasn't absolute. And for Claudia, that realization was unbearable. The week after Marcus unveiled the new lease felt like living under storm clouds. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some residents avoided him altogether. Others offered quiet nods of solidarity. But inside Claudia Hensley's pristine home, the storm raged hottest. For years, Claudia had ruled Red Rock Valley like a queen. She ended meetings when she pleased, bent rules when they didn't suit her, and wielded fines like weapons. People had tolerated her because she was relentless, and most didn't have the energy to fight back. But now, her authority was crumbling. Board members who once echoed her words now sat silent, flipping through Marcus's certified documents with furrowed brows. Neighbors who once scurried past her driveway crossed the street without waving. Late one night, Claudia sat surrounded by stacks of paperwork and empty wine glasses. She rifled through old leases, meeting minutes and correspondence, desperate for anything that might give her leverage. Her husband Richard stood in the doorway, hesitant. "You've been at this for hours. Maybe it's time to step back." Claudia's eyes burned as she snapped. "Step back? If I step back, he wins. And if he wins, everything I've built here collapses." Richard sighed. For years he had let her obsession consume her. Now it frightened him. The next board meeting was chaos. Residents filled the room, voices rising. "Why weren't we told about the lease expiration?" one woman demanded. "Where did our money go?" shouted another. Claudia slammed her gavel. "Order. This is my meeting." "Your meeting?" a man in the front row interrupted. "Or the community's meeting? Because it sure feels like you've been running it for yourself." The room erupted in applause. Claudia's face turned crimson, her hands trembling as she raised the gavel again. "I've done nothing but serve this neighborhood," she cried. "Serve yourself," someone muttered loudly. The gavel slipped from her hand, clattering against the table. For the first time, Claudia looked small, her power shrinking under the weight of truth. Marcus stayed quiet in the back, resisting the urge to gloat. This wasn't about humiliation, it was about accountability. Still, he knew one thing for certain: bullies never collapse gracefully. They fight until the bitter end. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was drinking coffee when a knock rattled his door. He opened it to find Claudia herself, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, clutching a thick envelope. "What's this?" Marcus asked cautiously. Her voice was hoarse. "The board voted last night. We're accepting the new lease." Marcus raised his eyebrows. He flipped through the envelope. Every board member had signed, Claudia's name scrawled hastily at the bottom. "You fought hard to stop this," he said quietly. Claudia's jaw tightened. "I fought because I thought I knew what was best, but they don't trust me anymore. You took that from me." "No," Marcus replied firmly. "You did that to yourself." For a moment he thought she might lash out again, but then her shoulders slumped. Without another word, she turned and walked down the gravel driveway, her heels crunching against the stones. Alana stepped onto the porch, watching her leave. "That looked like surrender." "Not surrender," Marcus said, slipping the envelope under his arm. "Admission." In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Notices went out to all residents explaining the new lease terms. Dues rose slightly, but for the first time in years, the budget was transparent. At meetings, residents asked questions instead of staying silent. The board listened instead of dictating. Accountability, long absent, returned. Francis stopped by one afternoon, leaning on the porch railing with a smile. You've done what no one thought possible. You broke her grip. Marcus sipped his coffee. I didn't do it alone. People just needed someone to push back first. Francis nodded. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person brave enough to stand up. Not everyone was happy, of course. A few grumbled about higher dues, blaming Marcus. But most saw the truth. Claudia had manipulated them for years, and Marcus's stand had forced honesty back into the system. As for Claudia, she faded from public view. She stopped attending meetings. Eventually she resigned. Some whispered she and Richard were moving. Others said she couldn't face the shame. Marcus didn't care. The fight was over. One evening, Marcus and Alana sat on the porch, the sun dipping behind the red mayas. The ranch stretched before them, peaceful except for the soft sounds of horses in the pasture. You know, Alana said, resting her hand on his, most people would have given up after that first letter. Marcus looked out at the land. That's how bullies win. They count on people folding under pressure. But this place? I worked too hard for it. I wasn't about to let anyone take it. She smiled, and now the whole neighborhood knows it. Marcus breathed deeply, the weight of weeks of battle finally lifting. The sleepless nights, the constant tension, the fear, it had all led to this moment of peace. The lesson was simple but powerful. Standing your ground wasn't easy, but sometimes the fight wasn't just for yourself. It was for everyone too afraid to speak up. As twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Marcus thought of the neighbors who had thanked him, the ones who now felt free to question authority, the ones who no longer feared Claudia's gavel. Maybe they'd never fully understand the cost of his stand, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd never be afraid of her again. He turned to Alana with a small smile. You know the best part? What? She asked. I didn't just save our ranch. I made sure nobody else will have to go through what we did. Her eyes glistened as she squeezed his hand. That's worth more than any lease. And with that, the long fight was finally behind them. Perlin's coin. If the story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more, because the battles worth sharing are the ones that prove real strength comes from standing firm, even when the odds are stacked against you.